Good morning, all, and welcome to the formal virtual presentation of the National Agenda for Democracy Strengthening. We're about to commence, but I would just like to give a few housekeeping rules. Please, if you're not speaking, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted. If you need to speak during the question and answer session, you can please use the raise your hand button on your device, as well as you could also drop questions in the chat box for the moderator who would be moderating the question and answer session. To commence the presentation, I would like to invite the CEO and Executive Secretary of American Business Council, Mrs. Margaret Olele, to give the welcome remarks.
Thank you so much, Joy. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's event. I would say that as co-conveners, we would like to specifically the American Business Council and SIPE would like to welcome and thank everyone for coming. This is not a closing remark. The journey, obviously, to this point has not been very easy, and it's actually delightful to see a lot of the stakeholders who've been part of making this journey and this advancement towards the virtual presentation of the NADS. To see them here as well. I would just like to say that. Just like we know that Nigeria still remains a young democracy, and that even conversations around democracy is not. I'm most tempted to use what we use in the local pidgin parlance, that it's not moi, but it is. It's a very complex journey. And so, being able to be part of a journey by providing, I would say the right tools in a sense to move this forward, it's really a great advancement, and I'm really excited about today. Now, today is not all about me or us, but it's really more about this virtual presentation. And so at this point, I would hand over to Joy for her to continue with the deliberation and this very, very important event. Over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Margaret, for the welcome remarks. I would now hand over to Mrs. Lola Adekoye, who would be giving us an overview of the Private Sector Development for Democracy Forum that has come together to put together the National Agenda for Democracy Strengthening. Over to you, Lola.
Thank you, Joy. Good morning, everyone. And really thank you for the very, very important job of steering the entire process of getting us to the NADS. I think that I'll start off by just running down memory lane. As Margaret says, it hasn't been easy, but I think that if the process of maintaining democracy were easy, then we probably wouldn't have been doing it right. So rightly, as Margaret said, the last 2 years since we started to think about the PSDF, and it's fitting that we're exactly just close to 2 years since this conversation started. 25th of February was, significant for us in Nigeria. Millions of Nigerians went out to the polls in what observers and many analysts call the most contested elections that we've had in the country in the recent democratic history of Nigeria, say going on 3 decades, 20 plus years. And consensus hasn't been that was our best outcome in terms of elections. However, elections and the electoral process is only one aspect of the pillars of democracy. And in thinking about the PSDF, we realized that neglecting the efforts to strengthen the other pillars of democracy has been something that we have to rethink. And some of the other pillars of democracy that we learned about in this process, or not learned about, but spent a lot more time thinking about in this process, led to the development of the NADS that has 4 priority areas that I'm sure Joy will talk about in more detail. But in coming to the consensus on those 4 priority areas, it was important. I'm sorry, you'll hear my dog barking. I think she's getting excited about the sound she's hearing, so I'll take care of that in a minute. But if you don't hear it, then don't worry. If coming to the NADS required a lot of collaboration. It required us to think about how we make sure that we capture the voices of constituents in Nigeria that have interest in ensuring that we have sustainable governance systems in place at every level, but also have the influence in advocating for sustainable governance systems in terms of our democratic values. The first constituency, if I asked everybody about what group of institutions in our country work on democracy issues, and we're very, very, very active during the 2023 elections and before that, and have done a lot of good work to bring us to a point where we have a very competitive system where competing ideas, at least we have more competing ideas coming to the fore during political debates and analysis. You would say the civil society organizations. And so PSDF is made up of that constituency of civil society organizations. And then the other constituency would be the academia. And these are the folks in our universities, in our educational institutions who spend a lot of time on research, going way back to, recent history around, well, not recent history, but older history around the framing of public international laws that has led us to developing a democracy the way we have it in Nigeria. And then the other constituency is the media. We call them the fourth estate of any democratic system. And then, never mind the noise, I'll take care of it. And in addition to the media, I'm coming to private sector last. But in addition so we have the academia, civil society, the media, and think tanks. Supporting the media, these are organizations that are research and do tanks in some sense, but of course conduct a lot of research on democratic issues. Most importantly, and if you look at the conveners, we operate in the private sector space. The American Business Council, a co-convener with the Center for International Private Enterprise, works on private sector development, private sector advocacy, business advocacy, and the private sector is that other very critical partner in the PSDF. And so the opportunity for the private sector to work with these 4 constituencies has made the difference in coming up with a national agenda for democracy strengthening that's very robust and really addresses all the pillars, including sometimes the ones that we forget around strengthening democratic institutions, which is things like equitable distribution of resources and economic opportunities and rights. So I don't have that much time. I think that's a good summary of what the PSDF, is made up of. You will meet some of the steering committee members of the PSDF today, including the chairman, who will be speaking a bit more about the NADS. And I'll be very happy to answer any more questions about the PSDF. But suffice to say, very proud, SIPE is very proud to co-convene this with the ABC. And we remain co-conveners because the NADS, intellectual engine is driven by the members, and the members are made up of these 5 constituencies. So today, as we launch the NADS, I definitely want to say thank you to all the members for the hard work they've put into putting this together. And I really look forward to the interesting conversations that would follow. So thank you all. Back to you, Joy.
Thank you, Lola. I guess we didn't hear your dog back, but that's one of the sides of working remotely. So I will now move on to a major part of this presentation, which is our keynote address. That's quite key for us, the keynote address. And I would like to thank our keynote speaker, especially given that he's not in our time zone. So that means that he's up this early, very early. This is actually in the middle of the night for him to actually join us here. Our keynote speaker today is someone who is very known to most of us here, if not all of us, Professor Pat Utomi, who is a political economic professor and management expert. He's a senior fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants of Nigeria and a former presidential candidate. With experience in public office and the private sector, he was an advisor to the President of Nigeria and Chief Operating Officer for Volkswagen of Nigeria. He founded the Center for Values in Leadership, that's CVL, a social enterprise organization dedicated to empowering Nigerians to make lasting contributions in areas of business, public life, and civil society. Currently, he's a professor at the Lagos Business School, which is Pan Atlantic University, and he's also the inaugural Brown Capital Management African Program Public Policy Fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington. Professor Utomi also chairs the African Union's Pan-African Private Sector Trade and Investment Committee. I would like to hand over to Professor Pat Utomi for his keynote speech.
Thank you so very much. I'm glad to be able to join you and also to see some previous collaborators in matters of this nature here on this round. Let me begin by saying that there is something I've repeated a few times in the last week or so. And it is something that, jumped at me when last year Nobel announced the economic prize, Nobel Prize for Economics. It was going to James Robinson along with NASME and Johnson. As most of you know, they wrote a book that has become quite well known. It's titled Why Nations Fail in 2016. And I often like to remark that in 2006, 10 years earlier, I wrote a book titled Why Nations Are Poor. And the fundamental premises of both books were the same, the place of institutions in economic performance. But on that day that they announced the prize, James Robinson was interviewed by CNN, and he made a point that the path to development is no more something in Netherlands, in never go to a place. It's available, it's within reach, and that most countries actually know what to do to take place. And then he pointedly said that some countries, mentioning Nigeria, know what to do, but somehow cannot seem to do it. I think that is so important in discussing the question of democracy, because one of the things that they have been honored for is trying to make the point that invariably democracies facilitate development if they are truly democracies. And part of the reason is because the true definition of democratic space, if you go by the ultimate philosopher of the public sphere, the German Jürgen Habermas basically argues that modernity and democracy meet at the place of rational public conversations. The rational public conversation suggests through this marketplace of ideas that this particular way of doing it is better and people will vote that way. Invariably in their iterations, what will come out will be what leads to greater progress. So I think that is a pretty good basis for looking at the importance of democracy and why private enterprise should pay attention to its role. But even putting it more in context is the fact that back in 1985, there was a conference in Nairobi in Kenya, which was much celebrated. It was sponsored by the Aga Khan Foundation, and it was about a tripartite approach to development, in which it was argued that the private sector, the public sector, and what was then called PDAs, private development agencies, or the civil society, social enterprise sector, that to make progress, these three sectors need to collaborate. As a result of that conference, the leaders of the delegation from Nigeria, at the time the private sector delegation was led by Chief N.S. Shineko, who was then chairman of UAC. The public sector was led by a permanent secretary, Alaji, AAA as it was generally known, and Dr. Jack for the social enterprise sector. The efforts that they put together and returned from that conference resulted in the Enabling Environment Forum. The Enabling Environment Forum, which was generally, if you will, chaperoned by a gentleman called Udo Wakaneme, and the Creamer had a national summit in Abuja, I believe in 1993 or thereabouts, after series of meetings in Lagos. And it was what metamorphosed into today's NESG. So there is something to say for a role for the private sector and the public sector collaborating with civil society to make democracy work. There's another really paradoxical thing about this conversation and why it is important. You know, markets, the big challenge we have is about making markets work. Adam Smith, the father of modern capitalism, if you will, suggests that the driver of markets is self-interest. And so the private sector, to advance its own self-interest, does have a duty to caring about democracy, because democracy can make markets work. However, of course, there are limits to everything. The way we saw the world took some shaping, if you will, in 1968, when an ecologist, a marine biologist called Garrett Hardin, published a paper that was titled The Tragedy of the Commons, where the self-interest of an actor in the face of scarce resources can lead to a depletion of those resources. And it turns out to be a lose-lose proposition for everybody. The private sector, therefore, has to understand that following Adam Smith all the way may not necessarily be in its best interest. So they need to collaborate to put boundaries that will prevent private interest from driving resources to depletion arises. And one of the biggest efforts to explain human progress is really the place of institutions in economic performance. And in many ways, what institutions do is set boundaries to conduct outside of which there are consequences. Of course, one of the best conversations on institutions and economic performance that I know of was that offered by Douglas North, who also won a Nobel Prize in economics for his work. His 1990 book, Institutional Change and Economic Performance, is probably one of the best writings on this. And if you read my own book, it's sitting right here, it's titled Managing Uncertainty, Competition and Strategy in Emerging Economies. Part of what I tried to do in this book, as far back as 1998, was to make the point that the environment of business in an emerging economy has a high level of uncertainty because weak institutions allow more readily what I described as predatory acts of officials, government action and predatory acts of public officials. So there is a fundamental need for the private sector to be engaged, but to engage in a way that it helps build level playing fields. I was very active in the space of private sector organizing back in the days of structural adjustment programs. And I recall that, back in those days, there was this big argument between the so-called manufacturers who wanted government to give them allocation of foreign exchange and the traders who wanted open access to foreign exchange. After playing games for a long time, in 1994, I was to speak at the very first Harvard Business School Association of Nigeria budget workshop. And Abacha had just taken over, delayed the budget until perhaps the night before the workshop at Sheraton in Ikeja. And the night before, the president of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Hassan Adamu, made a statement that Abacha, who was becoming revisionist about some things in the adjustment program, had said that direct allocation of foreign exchange to manufacturers, which Abacha had said he would do, was a great thing for the private sector. And then I joked that I was a member of the National Council of Man at that time, but I had a grave fear that Hassan Adamu and all manufacturers will regret that statement. But it wasn't a few months before manufacturers were saying, look, okay, we don't want special treatments, because as we know, this special allocation did not go to the manufacturers, it went to some chiefs and some alajis. So that's what institutions are about, creating level playing fields, creating boundaries around which we advance production. Many historians like Neil Ferguson have essentially argued that what has separated the West from the rest has been the strength of institutions. And we cannot build institutions unless those who are affected, like the private sector, get active. And the result of the conversations around horizontal linkages of interested parties is what ultimately becomes the boundary that leads to progress. So, in effect, democracy is important for economic advance. And therefore, private sector players do have a duty to participate in this process, to encourage this process without necessarily becoming partisans. I will begin to move towards a close by referring to a gentleman that I have known for many years who lives in South Africa. Today, he was involved in the June 12 struggle with us in the 90s. His name is Omano Edegije. Dr. Edegije has written a variety of books on the subject of what he likes to refer to as a developmental state. And part of his argument is that what has happened in Nigeria is that we have democracy without development, which is actually part of the title of his last book, Nigeria, Democracy Without Development, How to Fix It. And he essentially has been calling for coalitions of the willing who are focused on development and building developmental state, even if partisan politics deteriorates as badly as it seems to have done in Nigeria into name calling, wanting to manipulate systems for outcomes other than the general will of the people. I think that this idea, this concept of building coalitions committed to a developmental state will do a lot to get political actors on all sides to recognize that no matter what their political agenda really is, developing the state, creating an environment for private enterprise to create value, to make quantum leaps in value creation, is what leads to job creation and what leads to human progress in society. Therefore, the private sector not only has its interest, but has an obligation as a major part of the pillars of society to commit itself to a process that leads to democracy with development. And my hope is that the work that you're doing will lead to that happening and will lead to a lot of progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you for that insightful keynote speech, especially, showing us that we are on the right path with the coalitions we're doing presently. And there's need for everyone to keep, all sectors to keep working together to ensure that we achieve democracy with development. And we thank you for joining us despite the time difference. We do appreciate this. So next on the agenda, we will be moving straight into the panel conversation, which is basically going to speak to the power of collaboration, building a stronger democracy in Nigeria. I would just call out the moderator. I would introduce the moderator and the panelists before I hand over to the moderator who would be handling the session. So first, the moderator is Miss Imem Inang. She is the Business and Partnerships Director at Premium Times. I would like to highlight that, we talk about collaboration. So what we have done with this panel is bring together, the various sectors, more or less, the media, the academia, to actually speak to this issue of the need, the power of collaboration. So that's Mrs. Imeng Enang. Like I said, she's the Director of Business and Partnership, Premium Times. My first panelist I'll be introducing is Mr. Yemi Candida Johnson, who SAN, who is the Senior Partner, Stratum Partners, as well as he's the Chairman of the PSDF Steering Committee. So for the PSDF, we had the Steering Committee who actually drove the whole process with the members as well as the convening partners. So Mr. Candida Johnson has been at the key of developing this NADS. He has been, at the center of it all. The second panelist I'll be calling is Dr. Umar Yakubu. He's the Executive Director, the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity. Here, he will be representing the civil society organizations. And the third on my list, the third panelist is Professor Yakubu Ochefu. He is the Chairman, Conference of Alumni and Association of Nigerian Universities. He was just until recently the Executive Secretary of the Committee of Vice Chancellors of Nigerian Universities. So he would be representing the academia, and they are also a part of the PSDF, that's the Private Sector Development for Democracy Forum. And finally on my list is the last panelist is Ambassador Dapo Oyewole. He is the Secretary General. He's the pioneer Secretary General, yes, of the Conference of Speakers and Presidents of African Union Legislatures, and the first Nigerian man to be awarded the prestigious Richard von Weizsäcker Fellowship at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. You see, we are bringing in fellows. And I remember the last validation session, which we had in Abuja, one thing that came clearly, everybody said we must bring in the legislature when we're having this conversation about strengthening democracy. So I'm happy to say we listened, we heard, and we brought someone in who would be able to speak to us on this. So I would now be handing over to Ms. Imem, who would moderate the session.
Thank you very much, Joy. And it's quite an honor to be moderating the session with, erudites and people known for their expertise in the different areas of work. Now, just before we start this conversation, and it's instructive to note that Professor Tommy, in his keynote speech, had talked about coalitions of the willing. And so when we look at those that are on this on the panel, for instance, you'd know that these are names that occur each time a particular subject is to be discussed. So I want to believe already that we have that coalition of willing minds, coalition of those who believe in what it is that we're talking about. So now, for those that may just be joining us, the National Agenda for Democratic Strengthening is a high-level resource designed to inform policy frameworks that reinforce democratic institutions and systems in Nigeria. As much as we want to give up on what happens with democracy in Nigeria, we find that we still have these coalitions of people who are willing to take a chance. So this was created through collaborative efforts among private sector stakeholders, civil society organizations, think tanks, and media partners within the PSDF, which Mrs. Adekonya had talked about earlier. Now, the National Agenda for Democratic Strengthening seeks to promote governance, transparency, and socioeconomic development by offering concrete solutions to strengthening. Now, that's just a background for those that are joining us, for this, not knowing what the background is. I have quite a number of people who just want to join to know, do we have any hope for democracy in Nigeria? I'll start with my first question would go to the chairman of the steering committee, senior advocate of Nigeria. What are the challenges to democratic governance in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much. Some of the challenges obviously will be highlighted by the presentation on the actual NADS and the topics which were selected. But I think in general, it's fair to say that, and the context for answering the question is really some of the discussions we had when we started this project. we kept talking about business needing government and government needing business. And this again is a question of collaboration. It's like, I remember when we had that discussion, the memory in my mind was of the Titanic. The first class passengers perhaps thinking that only those in steerage were going to sink. The fact is that when the ship sinks, everybody sinks. And in any organized community, I think political society is how Professor Tommy would accurately describe it. It's important for everybody to recognize that their fate depends on the actions and the collaboration of everybody else. And then democracy is a device for achieving stability and development and progress in any organized territory. And I think that one thing that was highlighted, which isn't necessarily a topic of the presentation, is the failure of trust in that device. I think that many of the symptoms that we're addressing, the electoral dislocation, the problems with the judiciary, the problems with land management and resources, the sharing, are factors which will restore trust in the device of democracy. If people don't think that it's something that is valuable for them, then they will not support it. You know, even cooperating primates, chimpanzees and baboons, recognize that they have to do something each to preserve the collective. And this is what they do. They research, they understand what is the purpose of their existence, they recognize the dangers that they face, they recognize the things that threaten them. And from their experience, and from the record of their experience, and from the recording and transmitting of their experiences, they learn how to deal with those situations. It's the same thing with the human society. If chimpanzees and ants can learn how to collaborate and cooperate to preserve their own entity, then it behooves man, and which is meant to be the most intelligent of living species, to recognize that it's very important to trust in the system, which is for our mutual protection, and to engage ourselves directly together for the purpose of preserving it and protecting it. So that, I think, is what is key. We need to restore, by these devices and by addressing these symptoms, the lack of trust in the device of democracy.
I was going to make a remark, especially based on that of trust, because that's key and it's absent at the moment. But what do we do to build the trust? Maybe at this point, I'll ask Dr. Umar Yakubu. I'll ask that question to him. How do we then build this trust in trying to mitigate against the challenges that prevent us from building the kind of democratic governance that we all desire, the one we desire to see in Nigeria? How do we inspire the trust? How do we build it?
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? I hope I'm clear.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Yemi shook his head. Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. How do we build trust between the governed and those that are governing us within the context of democracy? Yeah, what builds trust is when you deliver on what you promise. That's simply how you can build trust between people. And if you know democracy, the whole essence of democracy, if you go through history and the philosophy of democracy, is to deliver, let's use our constitution now, security and welfare to the citizens. So once you are not delivering, there's no way you can have trust. It's as simple as that. So, but if you look at our challenges, you know, all the challenges we have on security, on economy, on education, all the data showing are mostly downward. Yes, we're improving in some areas and we're not in so many areas. All those good indicators of good governance. The problem we have is we are relying on people that were on political leaders, that the entry to that political space, the barrier to entry is so low. Now you have a country where to become president is just a WAEC certificate or primary school, I'm not even sure. Okay, let's say WAEC now. That's the barrier to entry to become president of a country like Nigeria that is so diverse, so dynamic. Also, when you don't have INEC, ensuring that its only role is not to conduct elections, but also to engage in deep political party regulation, where you bring out the best that can deliver issues of security, of economy, of governance, of all those things, you find out we are going to continue having these problems. So What we need to do now as private sector and civil society is to push for the discussions to ensure that, look, we have to work on the barrier to entry. Not, you can't just come with a secondary school certificate or primary school certificate. That is not enough. Taking things that we have done from other countries, let's say in China, it can be popularity based, because we have seen what popularity has done, where, sorry, with all due respect, you see actors becoming governors and presidents. I'm not saying that they may not be competent, but where you see people that have not had a history in managing people and managing resources coming to be part of government. So the discussions we need to move is we need to have a new wave, a new transition, where our political leaders are the ones going to be taking decisions on security, economy, and all other elements of good governance have to have at least, let's say, 3 pillars. One, the academic qualification is very important. You should know have some academics. You should, and we need to raise the bar because Nigerians are highly educated. The second one, anybody coming to vie for political office, you can't make laws where you don't know how to manage people and how to manage resources. That is why most of the times when we watch debates in the National Assembly, they are so weak and so shallow. You find that people are not even listening anymore because that experience is not even there and it becomes just a joke. So we have to know how we get these people. Then lastly, character. Yeah, it's a subjective issue, but your history about your character, how you manage people and resources, and whether you have bad records, not only corruption. It could be abuse, it could be what you do in your home, what you did when you were in school. All these things should matter so that when you get to political office or any position of responsibility, you have the ability to deliver on the dividends of democracy. And I'm sure there are a lot of papers out there, research to show why you see democracy may actually be increasing. There's a democracy index, it could be increasing, but your development is reducing, the economy sector and all those issues. So I think the lacuna of what we need to push for now as private sector and civil society is to start pushing for reforms on our leadership selection processes. And this totally lies with ANEEJ as the regulator of political parties and political systems in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So, Mr. Yewole, you've been in the private sector and now in government. What are the key barriers to effective collaboration between the private sector, academia, government, media, and civil society in Nigeria? And what concrete steps can be taken to overcome these barriers?
Thank you very much indeed. And let me say this very big thank you to the entire team for the invitation. I think NADS is a very important initiative whose time has come. And I really like to applaud the Center for Private Enterprise as well as American Business Council and everybody else who's been involved in this very important endeavor. I've actually had the privilege of working in all these sectors. In civil society, I led CDD's work in the UK. I've worked in the private sector, McKinsey, Palladium, in government on the executive and the legislative side. And in media, I was the Africa analyst for BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera. And coming into this and looking at it from multiple perspectives, I am reminded of this biblical reference of the Tower of Babel. And if you remember, at the point, and I don't intend to be religious, I'm just making a sort of reference, that if you remember in that story, the idea was that everybody was speaking the same language, and the fact that they understood each other, they could collaborate, and then of course the task that they had set for themselves of building a tower right to the heavens seemed very, very possible. And what the God did at that point was to change their language. And of course, with that came confusion. And that is exactly what I think we are all facing in this instance. The media, academia, government, private sector, civil society, we all want the same thing. We want safety, we want security, we want development. But unfortunately, the language spoken by these different sectors are very, very different. The pace at which they move is very, very different. The values, the norms, and the standards are very, very different. So it makes a lot of sense that you will find the level of incoherent conflict and the lack of collaboration that is required. And I think good Leonard fellow Yemi Candy Johnson mentioned it earlier on, that, and what happens, and you see this even happening in the international space when it comes to racism, when you see xenophobia, where people do not understand one another, the first thing they feel is fear. And then that fear is also either fed by mistrust. And therefore, even if they're able to collaborate, it is impossible. So I think, first of all, in terms of looking at ways in which the problem can be solved, you guys at NADS are doing exactly just that. The reference that Professor Utomi made about NESG, I think, is absolutely correct as well. The NESG, bringing government and private sector together over, I think, almost 30 years now, has been one of the key fora where you're able to bring the minds together and you're beginning to shape a common vision, a common language, and also a sort of shared modus operandi in terms of how private sector and government work. I realized, for example, after working in the executive arm of government in the Ministry of Budget and Planning, also in the Ministry of Finance, then going on to work in McKinsey, leading a lot of work in terms of public sector, I realized very clearly there were many strategies and approaches that could be taken from the private sector and brought into the government sector. And many attempts were made to do so. But what you find also is resistance. There's a book that was written, I can't remember the author, but the title is Africa Works. And it talks about disorder as a political instrument. And the argument they make in that book is that essentially when you see certain systems not functioning, it is not because the system cannot function. It is because private interests ensure that it doesn't function because some people profit from that dysfunction. So at times when you do see private sector coming with reforms, let's digitalize the process, let's ensure there's certain reforms that can make government processes more effective, you find resistance. My former boss, Dr. Shamsuddin Usman, he wrote a book, I think it's called Public Policy and Private Agent Interest. Also makes the argument that in many instances, let me tell you, Nigeria has some of the best policy documents you will find in Africa. There is no doubt whatsoever that we know what to do and how to address our problems. But you find that there are interest groups, both in the private sector and sometimes in the public sector, and sometimes colluding, that actually makes it difficult. Now let's go to the media. One of the things about the media in times past, I think the moderator, I think the first speaker, I think Madam Lola Adekonye referred to it as the fourth estate of the realm. That is very true. But what has happened now is that the media that used to be the bastion of truth has changed. You know, in our days when we were growing up in the military era, we realized that the first thing that the coup plotters would do, the first thing coup plotters would do is actually, before even seizing the capital or the office of the president, is that they go and shut down the TV house or the radio station, because they knew that the information that comes from the media can shape and influence how people respond to the coup. But that has changed now. The whole idea of citizen journalism, it's not a bad idea. Everybody has a right to have an opinion. But the ethics of ensuring that you're fact-checking and that the information that is being shared is accurate has more or less gone. And now that you have social media and you now see some of the currents that we're seeing coming from the United States, where issues like fact-checking are now looked down upon and being suppressed, I dare say that our democracy is going to be a lot more challenged by misinformation and things like deepfakes. So what do? We need to go back and strengthen the work of the professional journalists and the professional media to ensure that when you do hear information, you can still trust that information. Then talking about academia, I had the privilege of growing up on a university campus. And I remember that growing up, I spent my time in the houses of professors, seeing books flying around like many of the people as background in doing this teleconference. I did realize that then the level of discourse was very different from what we have now. You know, even in those days, even people who weren't as educated, if you listen to the rigor of their thinking and their discourse about policy, governance, economics, it was very high level. The challenge we now face, and I'm sure many of you have faced it, is a certain anti-intellectualism. You know, when you come out and you have big ideas, you reference books, people will tell you they're talking big English. And for those of us who started in academia before coming into government, you found that if you really wanted your message to be received, you actually had to dumb down to be heard. And that is not the right that is not the right way. I think Dr. Yakubu mentioned it earlier on that, you know, this is a country that has one of the largest numbers of PhD holders in Africa. We have one of the largest numbers of universities and, of course, private universities in Africa, even in the developing world. Yet, we are one of the countries where you don't even need a university degree to actually become a legislator or to even to hold the highest office. So, of course, it makes sense that when people like Professor Ochefu, Professor Utomi come to the fore and offer themselves to speak on behalf of the people and to represent the people and put themselves forward to lead, they are met with a lot of resistance and sometimes ridicule. And this is not just from the political class. Sometimes it's actually from the electorate, which moves us to the very important critical point of civic education. This is pure economics, ladies and gentlemen. If there's no demand, there will be low supply. If there's no demand from the Nigerian electorate for high-level thinkers, thought leaders, people who have proven themselves in private industry, in academia, in other realms of government to be the ones that lead, then you'll find that at the end of the day, you will never find a scenario where the best of us get to lead the rest of us. Now, the challenge also is campaign financing, something we haven't spoken about. I looked at the framework, a very excellent framework, the 4 pillars that NADS has. But I think one critical issue that we need to look at is campaign financing. Listen, if you have people who are bright, who are passionate, who are patriotic, but they don't have the means to even just buy the form to put themselves forward for electoral office, that is an automatic structural disqualification. You know, so we have to look at a scenario whereby the issue of campaign financing itself is addressed. And if we do not do that, I dare say that we will not find leaders who are the best people that can actually lead us. We'll find that we have leaders who are the people who can buy the elections and put themselves in the position. Last point that I'd like to make, which I think is absolutely fundamental, is inclusion. We have a scenario whereby we do not have enough women in political office, women who actually make up a larger aspect of our population, and young people as well, not to mention people living with disabilities. If we are not able to have an inclusive approach to governance that brings in women, that brings in youth, that does not, that even looks at the generational collaboration that is important between the older generation and the newer generation, and of course includes people with disabilities, we will have a challenge on our hands. Let me make my final point, which is this. If you have the best Mercedes-Benz that has a fantastic engine and the body looks great, you can even call it a G-Wagon. I like G-Wagons. But if you have one flat tire, that car is not going anywhere. I believe very strongly that when you talk about the private sector, you talk about media, you talk about academia, and you talk about the public sector, these are the 4 wheels of the democracy G-Wagon, if you want to call it that. If those 4 wheels are not working, if the engine is not in place, then we're not going anywhere. But we should not end this conversation in misery. I think as a nation, we have great cause to be very proud of ourselves. If those of us who grew up in the military era remember what it was like, this kind of conversation, all of us will be disappearing by tomorrow morning. But that doesn't happen anymore. We can speak freely. And we had 25 years of a broken democracy. The countries that used to come to lecture us about democracy are now the ones who are being challenged in terms of their own democracy. Perhaps we might even begin to start engaging in some capacity building about democracy. So I think, yes, we should identify what our challenges are, but I also think it's very, very important that where the gaps are, where we have flat tires, we should inflate them and ensure that we have a holistic approach to ensuring that we have a society that not just embraces democracy, but also makes that critical gap between democracy and development. Where you do not have development, democracy will be threatened, and where you do not have democracy, there will be no development. And I think these 2 things come together. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Oyewale. Now you spoke as someone who actually had been and worked in each of the, each of the sectors. Thank you. Thank you. I see that Professor Ochefu is now unmuted. So Professor Ochefu, using the PSDF and other specific examples of collaborations you have participated in, what lessons can be learned from these experiences to improve future partnerships? What can we do? What can we borrow from your experience to move this to what we would like it to be?
Yeah, thank you very much. And sorry for the previous glitch. And I would like to thank Professor Tomi for that inspiring lead paper. And then I've listened carefully to all the previous speakers, and as usual, they are all bang on target. And I think the nature and character of this program and how it has been structured, it's something that I found very useful, because it's always great to bring people from different perspectives to come and have a conversation on the same topic. And by aggregating their views and understanding and perspectives, we're able to build the issue of trust that I think Yemi Johnson mentioned, and Umar Yakubu also amplified. And one of the programs that I participated in that helped us to drive such an agenda used a lot of social experiments. And I think is something that this partnership can invest in or attempt to interrogate going forward. How do we use social experiments to discuss some of these salient issues that are encased in our body politic? And I think the whole essence of moving our laboratories from the fiscal laboratories within the campus and going to the marketplace, going to the political parties, going to the community centers and experimenting. You see some of it on our social media skirts, where they call it pranks on people, and you see the type of reaction that comes in. And so if we're able to engage more from the perspective of social experiments and testing some of these concepts and ideas that are coming our way, I think we'll be able to add some value and learn some valuable lessons from the whole process of building structured partnerships and collaborations. So we've done everything, and I think the only bit that I can see is missing in one way or the other is the fact that we have not tested some of these assumptions in the field. In policy making, we make reference to the motor park test of the policy. When you say, when government says alcohol is banned in the motor park, you really need to go and try it out and see whether the drivers are not, they even know if such a policy exists in the first instance, talk less of compliance to it. So how much of quote motor park test are we able to give some of these policy conversations that we are having to see how it resonates with the rest of the community out there, to give us a solid feedback mechanism based on empirical evidence to allow us fine-tune and take the conversation forward. So that will be my intervention for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, I'll be going back to Mr. Candidate Johnson. And it's just going back to our earlier discussion. So now putting it to practice, how can collaborative partnerships with academia, governments, media, and civil society effectively leverage private sector resources to achieve the recommendations in the NADS? Academia, governments, media, and civil society effectively leverage private sector resources to achieve the recommendations in the NADS.
Thank you very much. Well, the speakers who have spoken from academia, also those who have spoken with their feet on the four wheels of the G-Wagon, perfect analogy. Thank you very much. Have identified the fact that you need collaboration. It's a factory for development, and you need to be able to work together from conception to delivery of the product. That includes marketing, that includes mixing the formula, that includes selling the goods and delivering it to people's doorsteps. So it's an approach that requires, inevitably by definition, a collaboration. And if I may take the G-Benz analogy a bit further, a G-Benz needs fuel. And no matter whether the tires are working or not, and whether no matter how well you dress inside it, I assume that the driver may drive it and in less fancy clothes, and at the back seat may be the big chief in the flowing robes, and they can both sit down there. The air conditioning won't work, the car won't move. So it's not a gift that's been sought. It is a necessity. We're saying if we need to move forward together, we need your resources very often. And we see this collaboration, I think we see with key offices in government often being funded, or research aspects of government being funded by the private sector, because that product is required for the work that the private sector itself has to do. So I think that the necessity is obvious. What is not so obvious is the impetus. And this is what we're trying to create. If you set a plan in motion and you tell people this is what needs to be done and this is how you can do it, then people will recognize that they can do something. I was at a meeting the other day and someone was talking about funding of a faculty for medical law, and talking about the cost of, they'd recently set up a faculty for pharmacy, and they said it cost several billion. And they said, well, look, to the signs of panic in the faces of those who gathered there, the response is, well, you could sponsor just a room. I mean, in reality, even if you're going to buy a computer, the fact is you can, if you break down a task, people can identify the parts that they can digest. And some will digest large pieces and some will digest small pieces. So I think that the purpose is to make a plan. I referred again to the cooperation of primates earlier on, and everybody has a task. And the tasks that you deliver to individuals in any group depends on your experience of where the problems and the deficits have been up to that stage. So I think it's almost a no-brainer, and really a point that was just made, I think, by either Professor Oyewale or Professor Ochefu, is the massive capacity that we have, the intellectual capacity. You talk about, even if it's just the numbers. I find, even in my own work, I have not found any aspect of study for which I've sought an answer that I have not found a multiplicity of papers on Nigeria. So we have the stuff, and what we're doing now is saying, look, no point knocking your head against the wall. Here is the problem. We know what the solutions are. We're going to digest and distill them, and we're going to present them to you as an action plan. That, I think, is the model we're trying to follow. Okay. Since each time I speak, I send Ms. Enang to sleep.
She's not asleep. It's just that she's carried away. And I was just wondering, so is it done, or is there more coming? Thank you. And I love the fact that you said, in terms, when we sit together and talk, each person should find the bits that they can digest, because many times these things really overwhelming. I think we will all agree with that. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. And now I'm back to Dr. Yakubu. The NADS highlights the importance of strengthening electoral integrity and promoting civic engagement. How can collaborative initiatives, especially those involving technology and data analysis from academia and the private sector, contribute to transparent and credible elections? Now, we know there's no development without data. We've tried it many times in this country. So how then do we fuse these efforts? How do we fuse technology, data, and all to ensure that we get the kind of democratic institutions that we should have, starting from the area of trust credible, trusted, transparent elections, starting from there.
Okay, thank you, Madam Ime. I recall a paper I wrote in 2018, if I'm correct, when the then INEC chairman, Professor Jega, no, it was during Professor Jega anyway, where he asked for 300, I can't remember the amount, but it was in the hundreds of billions to conduct an election. So now, and I wrote my paper, how you actually conduct that same election with better outcomes, better trust, better results with 10% of that, whatever the billions were. I can't remember the amount. So if what they asked for was 429 billion, I made an argument that you can conduct the same election with 42 billion naira as at that time. And excuse me. An argument I made in my paper was to say, one, Nigeria is very big. It's very wide, where people that speak different languages, how many polling units, how many states. You have to utilize technology in improving your electoral systems, your voting systems. When I mean technology, for those of you that watch America Got Talent, sometimes, or British Got Talent, at the end of the program, you see 80 million people have voted, and the results just come out immediately. And no issue, no lawsuits, no rigging, no complaints, nothing. Now, if we what have online voting, some people will come and say, oh, some countries will interfere, they will do this, they will do that, and all these conspiracies will come in and just distort the whole process. Fine. You don't want an online voting, do electronic voting. And you can't do an electronic voting if you don't have your accurate national population data. When you have one card, just one card where there has every agency now wants to have your biometric data. Go and take your eyes, your iris, your thumbprint every time. NIMSI will take, road safety will take, immigration will take. They need to harmonize all this data where you have one single identity. So once you have your single identity, even economists, political scientists will come and break down the data. You can even see the real people that are poor, have the real data of where people live. Now, once you do that, you will now know where to deploy online voting, where there are low risk, let's say in Abuja, Lagos, and other high urban areas. For the rural areas, you go and do electronic voting, and you find that you spend 90% less of what you have earlier budgeted for. But most importantly, you have built trust. Nobody is going to come and say these elections were rigged. And to the earlier point made by Mr. Dapo, you find that even the politicians need to spend less on campaign. All the resources they have, all they need to do now is to motivate people to vote for me, because you know you don't need money. So the barrier of entry has now been improved, where people that have integrity, that have capacity, people have the requisite qualification, cannot come around for elections, even because they don't have money. But right now, what INEC has done or refused to do, they have set the barrier so high where if you don't have, say, 1 billion naira, you cannot even go for governor. Now, that depends on the state, because 1 billion naira now, you cannot even get a governor. Depends on the state that I'm talking about. Some states are actually 10 billion, because in some states, I think in Rivers, to become local government chairman, they are spending 1 billion naira, local government chairman. So now, what legitimate business can you do in Nigeria if you're into kidnapping, that you can have 1 billion naira to go and contest for elections? It has to come from public sector corruption. Kidnapping will not even give you that amount. It will not give you. Even if you are saying there's nothing, it must be public sector corruption, usually pushed through procurement fraud. So these are the things. And the private sector likes to feel they have this elitist complex, feeling they are not involved. The major person that feels the brunt of bad government policy is the private sector man. You people are employers. We're all employing people who are looking for salaries to pay. But because we have people that are not taking the right policies. So my first, like I just said, we need to minimize human intervention in our elections. It is purely natural for humans to be biased when their interests are involved. So when you reduce the human intervention by introducing online voting where you can, by introducing electronic voting where you can, you find that will reduce. Secondly, that identity is very important. having that data on our identity, how many we are, will help our economic policy, will help our security policy, and will help so many other dimensions of what we need to build on so that we move. Then secondly, INEC too needs to focus a lot. In fact, the weight of INEC's job should be 60% of political party financing, because that is the platform that these people come out to. But when they come out, when they don't do that, they just come out, conduct elections, then the fallback is all the problems we're having today. So the private sector of civil society need to push more, advocate more for more political party regulation, because everything starts from the bedrock. The political parties have to have philosophies based on what people want to vote on, why they are choosing them, not because the people have money or they don't have money. So we need to do that. And I like the example I think Professor Umi gave, that was re-echoed by Mr. Dapo, about the Nigerian Economics Summit Group. Now that is again elitist. It's at a high level, that's at the macro level. Something needs to be built at the middle level and at the lower level. Now, tactical level, where all these discussions are discussed, which is why whenever economic data is released, oh, the GDP, our GDP has increased, or the economy has grown by 3%. Like you said, the motor park example, you go to down the street, how has it affected me, the commoner? That is the basis, the whole basis of democracy. How has it improved the life of the ordinary man? So we need to have that a low-level engagement to see. You can't just be talking about GDP, economic growth, 3%. You can't be talking about all these things, debt reduction, number, without looking at the micro data of how it affects the common man. And because the private sector, who are the ones that drive all these other small and medium scale businesses, need to do that engagement, so they'll have a more robust mechanism that is down from the top, where it's the middle level and the lower level. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Yakubu. Thanks. And just as we round up now, our last two speakers would have 2 minutes left. I'm sorry, 2 minutes each to please round up. So Mr. Oyewole, I would ask that you please tell us how you think the private sector using research can help these collaborations or help to enhance service delivery and ensure transparency in the collaboration.
Absolutely, and thank you very much indeed. You know, I would start by saying that when you look at this hand that you have, you know, all the fingers are different, but they're all very critical. You hurt your thumb and see if you can pick anything up. The reality is that we need all the fingers on the hand of society to be able to function and to be able to work. Now, having said that, I think for the private sector particularly, there are many different areas in which they can add value. One is, of course, when you're talking about the need for research and development. That is something actually the private sector does very well, particularly in the area of engineering, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, but that's also needed in government. So helping to bring the process efficiency into government that enables evidence-based policy, data-driven decision-making, and technology and process optimization, I think is absolutely critical. But then also, like I said earlier on, you people have to be able to speak together to understand one another. I think fora like the Presidential Enabling Business Environment, PEBEC, who's now run by my very good friend and sister, Zahara Audu, I think is critical, because that is a forum where just using evidence-based metrics, you're actually able to look at barriers for creating an enabling business environment, which now needs both government, private sector, and civil society to be able to work together to attract foreign direct investment. And I think those are the kind of models that we should look at indeed. Now, also, one of the things when we come to academia, I remember just a few years ago, I went back to school as a Chevening Scholar. And this is after like 20-something years experience working in the international space. And a professor of international relations was teaching me about international organizations. And I sat there, knowing, having worked for many international organizations, I sat there listening to him and I felt, this is nice in terms of theory, but in terms of my practical experience, This is not how it works. You know, theory is good because it helps us to cogitate and think and gather ideas. But in terms of applying theory to practice, that's also needed. And I think it's important that perhaps Nigerian universities should adopt this idea of having professors of practice. I have always found where I find professors of practice, they're able to work with the theoretical framework, but also able to share real life experience. And I think that's one of the ways in which we're able to sort of bridge that chasm. I would also like to talk about the legislature, which I think is one aspect of government that we tend to ignore. We tend to focus on the executive, the president. The president is not as powerful as we think. The most powerful is actually the legislature because they hold the power of the purse. And as we say in Nigerian parlance, soup we sweet, na money kill am. Well, the people that actually control the budget is actually the legislature. And if you really think about it, they're also the ones who are closest to the grassroots in terms of their constituency. The presidency sits in Abuja and is a bit far away. We need to strengthen the capacity for legislative oversight, for parliamentary diplomacy, ensuring that parliamentarians are also helping to advocate and to ensure that the policies that the government is driving are reflective of the needs of the people. And I think without doing that, we'll have a bit of a challenge. I think finally, I think that institutions such as NADS is very critical. And one of the most important roles you can play is to break the barriers, break the silos. This has been a fantastic conversation because we're all looking at the same elephant, but talking about it from different angles. And because we're doing that, we can all see the entire elephant and not just the tail and the trunk. And that's what we need, a holistic approach. And I thank you very much indeed for bringing us together in what has been nothing less than a scintillating and very enlightening conversation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Oyewole. Now, there's a question from our audience, and I'm going to ask that Professor Ochefu please help answer that first before any other member of the panel can also add to it if they feel, they want to. There's a question on, there's a question that, please, can you put the question on? Sorry, the device I was checking now just went off. Joy, please, can you, how do I put it now? Put it up for me to read here. In the chat. Great, thank you. To what extent should the ups and downs of democratic consolidation in the US and parts of Europe weaken or strengthen our democratic resolve and efforts in Nigeria and Africa?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
So what's going on in the US right now? To what extent should it affect us here in Nigeria?
I think it was Dapo that mentioned that probably the time will come that we'll be going across the continent to give them lectures on democracy, because they are the ones that are turning America is one that is turning the tables on top of his head. And then, of course, in Europe, you see a resurgence of right-wing racist parties that are beginning to pick up, which clearly tells the story that there are structural problems that they have swept under the carpet for a very long time that are beginning to emerge. There are new challenges that they are unable to deal with. And then there are new realities of emergence of other powers across the continent that they are not able to relate with. And so you see this, what I call right-wing fundamentalism becoming very popular in parts of Western Europe and of course in North America, especially in the United States of America under Trump. So that will be my own quick take on that answer.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to make a contribution to that?
Well, if I may very briefly, I really think that one of the things we need to get rid of is this assumption that democracy is a Western concept. If you look at most of our own traditional structures of governance, they were very democratic in terms of inclusion, representation of women, communities at so many levels. And I think, yes, we've had years of capacity building, being trained, being told how we should run our governments. But I think we have come of age. Nigeria has come of age. Africa has come of age. And let me challenge it. The reality is that democracy within the Western construct may not necessarily work and be applicable exactly in the same way here. We are now in a space where we need to take authority and sovereignty and begin to shape a democracy that works for us and delivers for us what we really need. And we only have to look at China. When China was being, blacklisted for being a communist country, it was going to be ineffective, etc., etc. China has lifted more people out of poverty than many other countries. And now, in fact, you find that they're one of the most powerful and also one of the most economically advanced and infrastructurally advanced countries. So I think that it is a clarion call for us that, yes, a child at some point has to be taught by elders, but sometimes you grow up and then you take the reins of your own democracy. You take your destiny as a nation and you make sure that you use that to create the kind of democracy that delivers. So if any sign at all that we are receiving is that it is time for Nigeria, it is time for Africa to stand up, stand on its own feet and chart its own path towards not just democracy, but the kind of democracy that works for all of us and not just some of us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oyewole. Dr. Yakubu, Mr. Candidate Johnson, you have something to add to this in closing? A parting shot, 30 seconds.
Okay, yeah, when we're talking about American democracy, which has been a model of some sort for many years, I recall the anecdote of Thomas Jefferson, I think it was, who when asked at the end of the Constitutional Conference, what have we got? And he said, a republic if we can keep it. I think it's clear that every day the relationship of people to their government evolves, and it's for us to manage, as Professor Oyewole has said, exactly how we want to relate and how our own democracy works. And indeed, I also truly appreciate the reference to African forms of government and the fact that historically it is much overlooked, the fact that we had systems which guaranteed and recognized a variety of rights and allowed representation. And I think that we have indeed come of age. It's time for us to look to ourselves. We have the ability and the capacity and not wait to guess from what other people are doing.
Thank you, sir. Professor Chefu, Dr. Yakubu.
Yeah, my own parting shot is just that in terms of democracy, we just need to be less distracted about what's going on in other places and have a focus of what we need to do. The same constitution and types of democracy we're complaining about is working in Germany. It's basically the same, that type of constitution. If we are talking about other forms like China, it's working for them. So we just need to decide to implement what we already have, and it can work. And it can only work when you have the right people in the right places. And unfortunately, the only way to get to those places is through our current electoral system, which I believe is currently weak. It doesn't bring out the best. So we need to work on that to make sure that the best come out and deliver the dividends of democracy. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't agree less with my namesake, Umar Yakubu, that we need to rejig those processes that throw up leaders that have no business being running this country. Historically, we have seen that type of fiasco happening over and over again. So we need to do some real structural transformation of some of those institutions that help us build our democracy, because right now it's not really working the way it should. So I can't agree less with him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So, I mean, as we close, a few points, and this would by no means be all of the points that have been shared today, but just a few that we could take with us. The level, so let's say I've made a list of them, that we need to raise the barrier to entry for these leaders. I I believe we all agree with that. The language, the pace, the values, and all might be different in terms of when we meet to collaborate on our shared mission. However, the impetus of the need for that collaboration is what is important, may not be obvious to all. However, the collaboration is a necessity, and it's not an option, it is a necessity. People should identify rather than seek to understand it all, identify the parts that they can digest and break down the tasks every time. And we should not forget that we've got massive capacity, and as Africans, we already have some forms of governance in the past, which we could then adapt to suit us in the course of this collaboration. Thank you so very much, gentlemen. It's been wonderful listening, moderating, and learning from you all this afternoon. Thank you to SAC. Thank you to the American Business Council for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mayor, and thank you to all our panelists for the insightful conversation and actually digging deep into how, we could collaborate better to strengthen democracy in Nigeria. Time is fast spent, so we'll just go through the remaining part of the agenda in a breeze. The next thing on our agenda is a formal presentation of the NADS. And that I'll be handing over to our chairman, the chairman of the steering committee, as well as the senior partner at Candidate Johnson Law Practice, Mr. Yemi Candidate Johnson, SAN. So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning. We recognize that democracy is the cornerstone of our nation's progress and the foundation of our shared values, and we recognize that a healthy democracy requires continuous nurturing and adaptation to the evolving needs of our society. Today, it is my honor to formally present the National Agenda for Democratic Strengthening, which is a comprehensive document with recommendations on 4 priority areas to address threats to democracy, governance challenges, and development opportunities in Nigeria, thereby promoting investment and inclusive growth in the country. The choice of the priority areas hinged on the potential catalytic effect to positively impact other democratic concerns and the subsequent effect on Nigeria's economy. The NADS is the culmination of extensive consultations, rigorous research, and collaborative efforts by members of the PSDdF and a broader audience of stakeholders. The development process of the NADS included validation sessions and feedback obtained from these sessions, which was incorporated into the document. The NADS seeks to promote governance, transparency, and socioeconomic development by offering concrete solutions for strengthening democracy while emphasizing the role of private sector organizations, civil society, and academia. To strengthen Nigeria's democracy, the NADS speaks to 4 priority areas that should serve as guideposts for prioritizing interventions. The first is strengthening specific democratic institutions, reinforcing the independence of transparency and accountability in the judiciary, the press, the electoral institution, and the anti-corruption agencies to ensure democratic integrity. Second, strategic capacity development and civic education, closing the skills and knowledge gaps in critical government institutions to keep up with advancements and sophistication of governance and resource management, as well as increasing understanding of civic responsibility among citizens, is key to fostering a participatory and well-informed democratic culture. Third, promoting private sector accountability, transparency, and responsibility to curb corruption. Enhancing the private sector's commitment to addressing systemic corruption and promoting accountability in commercial transactions and private-to-public transactions and interactions through preventive measures, institutional reforms, and the enforcement of ethical standards. And the fourth is advocating for land tenure reforms to address arbitrary use and abuse of powers. Reforming land governance to address inequities, improve economic opportunities, and reduce conflict. The need for collaboration for implementation is what makes this agenda necessarily a collective effort, requiring collaboration amongst government agencies, civil society organizations, the private sector, and citizens themselves. We call upon all members and stakeholders to actively participate in the implementation of this agenda and to use this in advocacy. The agenda can be downloaded from the PSDdF website, www.psddf.org, and the link to download will be shared on PSDF social media handles. I'd like to thank everybody for this session, for being so committed to strengthening our democracy and our country. Together, we can indeed build a brighter future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation of the NADS. I will be dropping the link for the download. It's actually on the PSDF website under resources. I will drop the link shortly here now. Next, we will be moving on to the remarks from Dr. Kujili, Dr. Kenneth Kujili, who is the Director of Plans and Projects, Planning and Projects at the Federal Ministry of Budget and Planning. For most people who are familiar with, the PSDF, especially with the NADS validation sessions, one thing that we spoke about is that the NADS is not an end in itself. So what we are also working with the Federal Ministry of Budget and Planning is to see ways in which we can work with them, especially with developing the new National Development Plan, which is due. The new one is due, I think, 2025 or 2026 to 2030, if I'm not mistaken. I think Dr. Kujili will correct me on that. So we're actually looking to work with the Federal Ministry of Budget and Planning on the development of that and seeing ways to incorporate the recommendations of the NADS into that document. So with us here is Dr. Kenneth Kujili, who has been with us, some part of this process. So we're just going to give him 3 minutes to give brief remarks on, on how the collaboration we're working towards, looking on how to work with them, and to talk about the National Development Plan. Dr. Kujili, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I guess you are hearing me. Thank you very much.
Yes, we can.
Me?
We can.
Oh,
we
thank
can.
you very much. This is nice. I think first, let me quickly for 1 second or 2 minutes, a minute, commend the speakers. I've listened to your presentations and they're all nice. And like as she has introduced me from the government side, all we are doing here is working with public and private sector to give Nigeria a better democratic dividend. I first again want to say that these documents, the 4 priority areas of this document are all interesting. And the public presentation of this document today is actually coinciding with this period that the government is about to commence the preparation of a successor plan. We are all aware that Nigeria had produced a long-term plan, perspective plan, which we tagged Nigeria Agenda 2050. That Nigeria Agenda 2050 is to employ 6 5-year medium terms plans to actualize it. And what is that Nigeria Agenda 2050 say? Is aspiring, is looking forward to see that Nigeria transforms from a developing economy to upper middle income countries by the year 2050. To become an upper middle income countries by 2050, there has to be drastic changes. In fact, that plan is saying that by that 2050, Nigeria will be taking in a per capita income of over $33,000 for per capita income. And in doing that, it means that we have to move the economy, move the drivers of the economy towards the private sector, which the first year plan actually started. So right now, we are about to start the successor plan, which is 2026 to 2030. The last of the series of the 6 plans is going to be 2046 to 2050. So we're about to start the 2026 to 2030. And what thing that stands out there is this. You can see 2030. What is 2020 globally? You're talking of sustainable development goals. And that talks about governance as well. So aside the Nigeria, the Renewed Hope Agenda, which has 8 points, 8 priority areas, they're all aligned together using the Renewed Hope Agenda to drive the implementation of the plan. That's exactly what the current government is doing. We have all been seeing some drastic decisions taken by the government. These are all stated in the plan. So to be frank, the government is not working outside the plan. The government was not this current regime was not the one that put the plan in place. But the decisions they're taking are all about implementing the plan. We're talking about the continuity, ensuring that we continue what we started some time ago so that we can get to a level where we begin to experience improvement or changes. As per this session that we just had, it's great. As I said earlier, we need, we have come up with some thematic areas of the economy that has to be considered, discussed during in the course of this preparation. And we have about 37 of them that we divided the economy to. And one of them, a very important part of it, is the good governance. We are talking of good governance, rule of law, anti-corruption, and national reorientation. We also have an area there where we are talking about national security and also talk about the civil service reform. This area, when you are talking about good governance, is all about, it encompasses these 4 areas that this document, National Agenda for Democracy Strengthening. So I think there's a room for working together. As we continue to move forward in getting this plan, we are trying to ensure that this new plan comes up no later than 1st October, so that the president would have launched it by 1st October, and the implementation will start immediately from January 2026. So I'm trying to do is to see that this time, but one of the most challenging we face is that sometimes the plan is not strictly followed when we are even doing our budgeting. So what the government is trying to do now is to create some level of discipline within the institutions so that the plan comes up, after which budget can be drawn in a way that it reflects the plan. So those are some of the things that are grand. And we believe that as we make progress, we should also be available to work with government. And again, governments usually don't have money, and my friend Joy knows. So we are hoping that you guys, Joy, and other groups there will be able to bring funds to support government. And sometimes we request that you also render selfless service when we are going to do this, because sometimes I saw in the presentations, these speakers are very good guys, and I celebrate them from this end. So when we decide to, when we get your name and send you a letter to please be part of this work, do not ask us for money. We expect that you are coming with your brain and come with your money to support us. We want to say a big thank you. We really appreciate it, and we hope and look forward to work with all of you. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kujili, for that. We look forward, PSDF looks forward to working with the ministry in the development and implementation of the National Development Plan. We have come to the end of today's meeting. I would then like to call on Mr. Adewale Smart Oyerinde, the DG of NECA, who is also a member of the PSDF, to give the closing remarks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for the privilege to give what you have called the closing remark. But in the real sense of it, I'm not sure this conversation should close. You know, it's like it should continue for quite a while because of the fundamental inputs that the speakers have made and the perspectives that they've brought into this conversation. And kudos to you also and the team for pulling this off. Well, it's been quite incisive. I've been on the road and I had to join in the car, and fortunately, network also cooperated, and there was no fluctuation in the while I was on the road. So I followed through the whole conversation, the challenges that we have politically, the issues as enumerated by Professor Pat, and then the private sector perspective and role that the speaker has also brought into the context of the conversation, which was aligned absolutely with the thought line, but we cannot also close our eyes to the challenges and the dynamics of this environment. Notwithstanding that, the commitment from the private sector remains absolute to this project, at least from our side, from the side of the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, and our commitment to also continue to drive this process until we achieve the full objectives of this whole project also remains absolute. So thank you once again for the initiative, for this very important initiative, and also this very important conversation. As I said, it's I won't take this as a closing remark, because as I said, I think we should find a way for this conversation to continue, and so that we're all consistently keeping alive or living this dream, and focusing on the implementation of all the action plans that have arisen from this conversation. So thank you once again, and we wish all of us a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you very much, sir. Like you stated, the conversation doesn't end, and PSDF actually doesn't end, because with the NADS, there comes the implementation phase. And as we move forward, we will be coming up and sharing, sharing the activities we've lined up to help, and the strategy we're looking towards ensuring that the recommendations of the NADS, are actually implemented. We will still continue, the PSDF still exists, like I said. We'll continue engagements and conversations with members as well as stakeholders. And I'm sure in a very short time, we will be back to see, how far we've gone with this implementation. The major thing now that takes place after this is we're going to start engaging government as well as other stakeholders with the NADS, presenting the document to government and other stakeholders. This will require the support and, as usual, the continuous commitment of our members and stakeholders. I thank you all for joining this formal virtual launch. And I would like to say thank you to the convening partners, American Business Council and SIBE, for the support all through this process. Thank you very much all, and enjoy the rest of your day.